Representative James on your House Resolution 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Vice Chair walked out. I do have an amendment that I'd like to place on it. No, Representative Newell is going to do it.
Okay, let's have staff read it in. Who has it?
Members, you were sent a version of this amendment yesterday. It was version 200. We did do a revision this morning, 224. It's available online. Most of the amendments, members, are technical. The substantive amendments are going to be amendment number 5, where it adds the chair of the municipal committee and a member of the municipal committee appointed by the chair. And then the last amendment, amendment number 14, where it adds a representative of the Sheriff's Association, a representatives of the Association of Chief of Police, and also a representative of the Office of State Police.
Representative Newell offers this set of amendments. Are there any questions on this set? Hearing no objection, the amendments are adopted. Representative James, on your bill as amended, on your resolution as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Noel, and members. Members, without going too deep into this, we have hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of various states right now, looking at how do we reform policing. This resolution with the amendment, my chief of police called me and kind of he got on me for having a task force and not including law enforcement. So that's why you saw that amendment, because in 2017, 2016, when we worked in Baton Rouge, we did all work across the table. So you saw that amendment to add representatives from law enforcement. And this is, just for us to study issues from, and municipal is important because a lot of those, civil service things go through municipal, but all of this committee, judiciary, just to look at issues from civil service agreements, use of force, retirement, just, a plethora of issues regarding how we're policing across the state of Louisiana, and also had a conversation with Representative Bouye about the language here, and I know he's probably going to speak to it, and I committed to addressing that as well.
Okay, Representative Johnson.
Representative James, I have no problem with studying anything that we can perhaps result in a better outcome for anything that government's involved with, but I am concerned with the tone. The preamble to this deals with one particular tragedy that we all are aware of, and abhor the fact that it happened. But I'm concerned that you preface this by talking about, and I see it as an implication, the deaths of black men at the hands of white police officers. That would imply this is a study in race more than a study in policing, and I object to that. I think that if there's a problem, we need to go with an open mind and not presupposing that it's a I haven't seen statistics that show what you may teach me with stuff that would make this just a black-white issue any more than we would include a study on crime. I think you would be offended if I were to put an amendment that presupposed race as being a basis of crime. So I don't want to say offended, but I'm not happy about that part. I don't have a problem with studying crime, policing. Mm-hmm. Obviously, my experiences with the police may be different than your experiences, but these types of things that have happened.
That's the same conversation I had in the
few and far between, because I have represented policemen, I've represented people against policemen. I've not seen that it's just a problem between black victims and white police, and so for that reason I have difficulty supporting the bill. I don't have a problem supporting reviewing and studying law enforcement and whether there's better ways to do it, or we're doing things we shouldn't be doing that we need to do, and leave it wide open. Mm-hmm. But I do have a problem with that.
I understand that, and that's the same conversation I had with Representative Bouye. For me, the evidence is the hundreds of hashtags that are out there that are black men that are killed at the hands of, officers. But I also saw during the protest a black officer punch a 50-year-old black lady. So I understand that, I'm more concerned with getting to the work and trying to see addressing it, and very not concerned about the language and the tone, and certainly didn't want to offend you in the fact that I've been offended. And at the end of the day, I think that our job is to study the issues, and like I committed to our colleague this morning when he brought the same issue to me, recognizing that the language could be a lot better.
Well, it seems like the study is the behavior will continue to happen unless we examine the systems that allow them to be repeated. And the only thing you mentioned that would be repeated is the presupposed problem that it's black men being victimized by white police officers. So if that's all the study's going to look at, then I do have a problem with that. If you're looking at the whole system.
Agree.
So
I think it's the issue for me is more about looking at the entire system. And in no way did I want to come here with an instrument to offend anybody on this.
I'm not
podium.
I'm not offended. I just want to be clear, and we all have the right to bring things that we feel personally strongly about.
Yeah.
And
I want the resolution. I want it to. We could have differences of opinions, but I want the same harmony that we all stood down there with.
right.
I want that embedded into this document, and if that sentence does not do that, then we could take it out now. We could take it out from between now and the floor. I'm more concerned with the studying the issue, and we can't do that if I have an instrument that anybody feels uncomfortable with the wording.
Well, I just have a problem with a study that presupposes the
I understand.
possible conclusion before the study's even undertaken. That's
And I don't want to get into that
we don't
debate,
need to.
and maybe the study we may come back and it may tell us that this is indeed the issue. But
Right.
as far as the instrument, again, I want you to, because I think that we both share the intent in correcting the problem. So I want you to feel comfortable with the instrument. And I don't want it to be written in a way that you are not comfortable, because I know that our experiences may be different. But at the end of the day, I think that we want to get to the information.
Well, if you're asking me what makes me uncomfortable, it's referencing one specific
I get
event
it.
that happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is not Louisiana. One particular police officer who I don't think even comes close to representing a minor percentage of the good men and women who serve as police officers. And then to presuppose that there's so many of these incidents that just are black and white, all of that, to me, tarnishes what, if the intent is honest, that it's to study policing across the state. And I assume you mean state sheriffs,
I mean, all of
police
them.
officers.
Yeah, LSU
Then-
Police,
then
Southern Police, BRPD.
These good people that work here in the Capitol.
The great people that work here, and while the harmony, so to speak, that we've seen around this one instance in Minnesota, I could have listed 10 people from Louisiana, and it different facts, same outcome. I could have done that. I could have listed several folks, right?
Yes, sir.
I chose this because of I think the diversity in the outrage. I know it didn't happen in Louisiana, but I think that there are certain things that we can do here that I'm seeing across the country, and I didn't want to just come and bring a bill based on what I thought we needed to change. I wanted to study the issue. I know that we can't legislate morality, but I think we could mitigate bad behavior if we file instruments and really look at certain things. And again, I'm more focused on lines 14 through the rest, and to get the information. And I understand your point of view, and I respect it.
Thank you. Yeah, if line 2 through 14 were removed, 13 were removed, I could support the bill. I can't with that language contained. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Boyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative James. Members, one of the things I was talking to Representative James about this morning was some of what Representative Johnson was talking about. I think when we limit it to just black men, we leave out a lot of other minorities as well. We leave out black women, we leave out white women, and I think we have to study the issue as a whole if we want to recognize the challenges that the system faces. If we even go as far as studying abuses that were had on white men, for that matter, because if we can compare, let's say an abuse for black men would be 5 for every 100 people incarcerated, and for white men it would be 2 for every 100 people incarcerated. Well, maybe that explains as an issue. If they're both 5 people for every 100 people, maybe it's a system issue and it's a training issue, and we have to focus on that, and it's not as much a race issue. I have a big Laotian population in my district, and so if Laotians are being treated unfairly, they're going to want to know. And we've had issues around the country and even here in the state over the last years, even in my hometown. And so I think by broadening the spectrum, as you were mentioning, Representative Johnson, I think it's important. Representative James has committed to making sure that we do a full study, and it's not all done under a microscope with one select piece of population. I think at the end we could have some meaningful results and meaningful statistics that we can actually take action on items to improve Louisiana and improve the citizens. And so I look forward to working with Representative James on the language. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep.
Thank you, Representative Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative James. And as you know, I come from a law enforcement family, and this as Representative Johnson, I've never seen a more racist document than the one you brought, because we don't feel that way here. When I look at you, I see Hollywood, do I not? And that's the way I was raised. Did not Martin Luther King say he longed for the day when men weren't judged by the color of their skin? I don't choose to look at Minneapolis as the norm, because it's not, and the statistics prove that it's not. There's nothing wrong with doing a study to see if our police officers have the proper training for their departments. I mean, they're always looking within to be better without. And is it not true that when crime against our law enforcement officers is committed, when they're ambushed, it doesn't matter what the color of the skin, wearing the blue. The target is the blue. And they're against law enforcement in general. We can't become a lawless. We are a nation of laws, and that's what we do here. And to make it better, studying issues is what we should do. And we stood up there together because that's the way the majority of us are. There's going to be good and bad in everything, unfortunately. No matter how many laws we pass, there's still going to be people who commit crimes. You cannot change that, unfortunately. But this document, unless it's rewritten at the beginning, I've never been more insulted since I've been elected. Because it's not, I hate that still prevails. When are we going to ever get past the 60s when we quit having incidents that happened like in Minneapolis? How that can be, that's a department issue. If that officer had a record of using excessive force, I blame the police chief for allowing him to continue. But I hate that anyone, even a criminal, had to suffer, because that's not what our system is supposed to be about. Justice is supposed to be colorblind, gender neutral. And when you put on that uniform, you are sworn to serve and protect everyone. This study has to include everyone, not according to race, not according to gender, but just the policies and the training that our officers have now and may need to increase to go out, and no matter how they're spit on and the names, how they're ridiculed and the fights they have to see. I would love for all of us to put on a uniform and go out in their world 1 or 2 days and see how they really do need a lot, probably more training than they're able to get, debriefings, because of what they tolerate as well. But we do hold them up to a higher standard, as we should. And so with all my heart, I pray that you will remove line 1 through 13, and let's make it a study for all men and women, because I know you. If you saw a police officer, no matter what color he was, hurting me, you would help me. If I saw someone hurting you or anyone, I could not stand by and allow it to happen. So let's act as one and make this a study about all. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, and if for those of you who are offended by the words, just look at me and Royce and think about how offended we are by the actions, right? That was certainly not my intent to stir up certain things, but when things happen against law enforcement officers, you don't, when in Baton Rouge in 2016 we had Alton Sterling killed and we had 3 police officers. I went to all 4 of the funerals. Like I visit with all 4 of the families because all of them were tragic. Right? When things happen against law enforcement officers, we just passed a bill that criminalized spitting on an officer, throwing water. We respond when things happen against officers. Too often when things happen against folks that are not police officers, and in the majority of the cases that I've seen, they're black males and black women. We don't respond. And the truth of the matter is, you're right. It doesn't matter what we pass if we don't have prosecutors that are going to prosecute them. It doesn't matter what we pass if police chiefs are going to fire people and the police union are going to put them right back in office or right back on the streets. That's what's happening. We passed legislation that said if an officer is convicted, he loses his post certification. He can't go to Baton Rouge and act up and then move to Lafayette. But you know what happens? They always resign before something happens, and we end up continuing to pay their retirement. We continue to pay supplemental pay, and this is not an issue with the institution of law enforcement. I have cousins that work for BRPD and the EBR sheriff, so I get it, right? And just like any bad actors are staying on the entire process. And this is, not about, my feelings versus your feelings, because nothing is going to change that. But at the end of the day, I think we all agree that we can do something. And if my colleague Dodie is telling me that this is the worst document that she's ever seen, I'm not married to the language. I'm not married to it. And lines 5 through 13, as long as we study the issue, it doesn't matter to me. We could delete it. I want to study the issue, and I want a document that you feel comfortable with, because if we don't address the comfort part, we're never going to get to the healing part.
Well, I'm with you.
I
would like to offer up an amendment to remove the offensive language and to keep the body of the heart of Representative James to study a matter on how law enforcement treats, however you want to say it, to have law enforcement study their own policies and see how they can improve them.
We have some other members in the queue. Why don't you come get with staff?
I think lines 5 through 10 or 5 through 13.
Can we do 5 through? Is that all right with you?
Hold on 1 second. Let me add.
Okay, I was reading through that.
Members, and y'all just let me know. The issue really is if we only pick up on line 14, it doesn't really reference any particular instance. So if we could delete lines 5 through 7 and rewrite beginning on line 8 and say, whereas the unreasonable use of force, including instances resulting in death, by police officers in recent years have raised a number of questions about the disparate treatment of different segments of society within the criminal justice system, as well as patterns of arrest-related deaths generally. And then you can pick up with that. Does that work for y'all?
That's fine with me.
Thank you.
Okay. So there's been an amendment offered by Representative Horton, which staff just read in concept, and we're going to give staff some leeway.
Thank you, Representative James. I know your heart.
And I know yours.
You're going to make me cry.
Are there any questions on the amendment? Representative Ivy on the amendment.
All right. So I've sent staff an alternate amendment for me. Again, it may not get everybody to the same level of comfort, but I do want to recognize that sometimes events happen that are a tipping point in our state and our nation. And while this didn't happen here in Louisiana, it's sparked a lot of attention to a serious situation. Obviously, there is a significant racial component to it. To ignore that completely, I don't believe would be fair. I do agree with the tones, and I know they weren't intentional. And so some suggestive language, and again, here to the floor, things like that. But I don't want to strip it down so much that, and so whereas the unnecessary deaths of our citizenry at the hands of law enforcement officers in recent years have raised a number of questions about the treatment of our citizenry, particularly racial minorities within the criminal justice system. So there's a way to do it, right? That again, if we did a ratio, right, if we studied it, there's a weighted, it's most likely a more weighted problem toward racial elements. And so I think if we just completely sanitize it, we're not respecting the problem that we need to study. And again, it's not solely black men at the hands of white police officers. It's a lot more broader than that. And I'm gonna leave the rest of my comments. Again, we don't have to take that up right now, but.
All right. Well, right now we have a motion on the amendment that was read by staff by Representative Horton. Is there any objection to that amendment? Well, Ms. Lowry, please read the amendment.
Again, the amendment would, on page 1, delete lines 5 through 7, and then reword lines 8 through 10 to read as follows. Whereas the unreasonable use of force, including instances resulting in death by police officers in recent years, have raised a number of questions about the disparate treatment of different segments of society within the criminal justice system, as well as about patterns of arrest-related deaths generally.
Okay. So there is a motion by Representative on the amendment? Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want the author to be comfortable with whatever language that he needs to be able to move forward the bill, because at the heart of it, as you say, is being able to have the discussion. I echo some of the concerns I heard from Representative Ivey. I think to turn a blind eye to the incident, I'm not necessarily saying the language here about the black man and the white police officer, but to turn a blind eye to this incident, to me, would be a disgrace. It would be. To not acknowledge that we probably would not be having this dialogue were it not for that incident that happened on May 25th, 2020, with Mr. George Floyd, who many of us see as a martyr for all people. He happened to be black. I would be just as appalled had there been a black officer with his knee on the neck of a white citizen. I would. I'd be just as outraged. I really would. I'm not necessarily saying that, the language needs to include the black man or the white officer or vice versa. But I do believe that this bill in some way need to acknowledge that this incident and the dialogue that we are going forward with began with what we all saw. And I believe everybody on this panel is appalled by that. And I want to say again, I want to be real clear about something. I can speak for myself, maybe no one else. Had it been a white officer did that to, a black officer did that to a white citizen, I would be just as appalled. I really would be. But incidents do happen, and they happen for reasons. And I think this particular incident needs to be memorialized in some form or fashion in the bill. I don't know how we could fit that in there. I know we got this amendment to deal with. But I just don't think we should completely eliminate any reference to the incident that occurred with Mr. Floyd, because that's really what sparked the inspiration behind this, as well as the need to begin to look at some of this. And yes, I do think we need to look at a broad spectrum of policing, all the way from people who are hired to be police officers, regardless of color, people, their temperament, their ability to engage the public, to try to minimize incidents rising to the level of what we saw happen in Minneapolis. So I would simply say, in some form or fashion, I don't know if it's going to happen in this committee. I'm asking this committee to think about that. I'm asking the author to think about it. But I do think that Mr. Floyd's name need to be somewhere in here. And it doesn't necessarily have to pick up race or anything like that, because I think we all know about that part of it. I'm not trying to block the amendment or whatever the case may be, but to take out the spirit of what this is all about, to me, does something of a disservice. Can we maybe add an amendment into the amendment, some language that may pick up that whereas on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd died in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and blend that into the language that we're trying to take up on this amendment? Or are we offended by the fact that it was Mr. Floyd? Because if we're offended by that, then we got a problem. We should be just as offended then about a whole lot of other incidents that have happened out there. Is there some way we could get that language to fit with what we have here without anybody, taking it the wrong way? And once again, I'm going to yield to the author now, because I want you to be able to move forward with your study. I'm not trying to poison your bill in any kind of way.
No, I'm comfortable with the amendment. I don't need the language to minimize what the incident and others, how it made me feel. I don't think you need it as well. I do think that I think that we as a body have to have an instrument that we are comfortable with to get to the work. And I think that the work will honor him more than his name being included in the resolution. And like 3 years ago, I probably would feel something different. But being here, being with what I went through this year, I'm more concerned about honoring him through the work than having his name, if that gives, and speaking and removing the language. I want to get the instrument to where most of us in the room are comfortable. I think we've done resolutions and we've spoken to his death in this body, and we've had other acts, and I'm more focused on the work than having the reference to the incident.
Okay. I yield to the author on that.
Thank you, Representative Jenkins. I have members with their buttons pushed. I don't know if it's on the amendment or on the bill, so just wave at me if you want to talk about the amendment.
My button was pushed for
The bill.
after the amendment for the bill, but I do think it would be valuable just to restate where we are with the amendment.
Sure.
Some members are
Well-
coming on. There's been a lot of discussion. Restate what the current amendment is.
Sure.
Okay, members. What the amendment would do would be, in essence, delete lines 5 through 10, but rewrite lines 8 through 10 to say, whereas the unreasonable use of force, including instances resulting in death, by police officers in recent years have raised a number of questions about the disparate treatment of different segments of society within the criminal justice system, as well as about patterns of arrest-related deaths more generally. Semicolon and.
Oh, no, I'm going to defer to the author.
Representative Gadberry, is it on the amendment?
The wording, where you say in there by police officers, should it be by law enforcement, or would that be misconstrued just strictly police officers, rather than law enforcement? I'm just asking the question. Because wildlife,
I think law enforcement.
Wildlife and fishery is law enforcement.
Yeah, because I clicked on you, so you went. Come on.
I think that's a good catch. That's a good fix. Yeah.
Okay, so we're withdrawing that amendment. We're submitting a new amendment. Right, Representative Horton? And Representative Horton's offering a new amendment that staff will read.
Okay. We're deleting lines 5 through 7 and lines 8 through 10 and wording the first whereas of the resolution to read as follows. Whereas the unreasonable use of force, including instances resulting in death, by law enforcement in recent years have raised a number of questions about the disparate treatment of different segments of society within the criminal justice system, as well as about patterns of arrest-related deaths more generally, and.
Okay, Representative Horton has offered up that amendment. Is there any objection to that amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. Representative Duplessis on the resolution as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just begin by thanking Representative James, Chairman James, on bringing this resolution. I want to thank you for your courage, for your leadership. I think the discomfort that all of us feel right now speaks to the fact that we have to address this issue. Period, point blank, no ifs, ands, buts about it. This is an issue that we are going to continue to grapple with as a state, as a country, until we're willing to have the difficult conversations. I brought a resolution earlier that was not as heavy as the one that you've brought, and I wanted to do everything in it to make sure that it wasn't being done in an accusatory way. I don't think your intent behind this resolution had any finger pointing or any accusing, or was ever designed to make anybody feel uncomfortable or to make anybody feel offended or disrespected. And when I look at the language from lines 5 through 10, I don't see any opinions in there. I only see facts. But I do respect the members of this committee, and I respect the author of this resolution. So I will defer to the will if that's what it takes to get us to working on this issue. I do believe that the issue of policing and the challenges that we have struggled with for a very long time in this country, unfortunately, do transcend race. I don't think it's limited simply to white police officers conducting certain behaviors towards black men. I do believe the issue transcends race. However, the statistics are also undeniable that the disproportionate majority of the victims of police brutality are black men. And that is a fact that we cannot run from. Now, whether or not it has to be pointed out in this resolution, we don't need to spend the rest of the day debating that. But it is a fact. So my hope is that as we continue down this path, we as lawmakers and as policymakers are courageous enough to embrace the fact that we cannot deal with race-based issues through race-neutral policies. Nobody wants to talk about race less than the people who are being affected by structural and institutional racism in this country, and it continues to exist. When we went down to the well last week, it was prompted by the issue of George Floyd. This is a watershed moment in this country, in this world. So I don't believe, that it was improper for it to be noted in the resolution, because that is what caused the protests. That is what caused us all to go down to the well and stand in unity when we did. And I believe this is a moment for us to act. But to ignore the issue of race, I think we do ourselves a disservice. And I'll make a comparison. As we all are moving forward as a state, moving past the issue of the pandemic COVID-19, which we all know did not discriminate. But when you look at the statistics of who was most impacted, we know the statistics. It was the black community that was most impacted by that. So let's not be offended or made uncomfortable by it. Let's ask why. Let's ask why. No, it is in our control. Listen. We have to ask the question why. This didn't happen. It's not a coincidence. What policies exist in healthcare, in economics, criminal justice, our environmental policies have led to these disparate outcomes. This is not an accusation. These are just facts. And these are facts that we have to be willing to talk about. But when we try to come with race neutral policies, we're not dealing with the issue because we're having disparate outcomes. So again, Representative James, I thank you for your leadership. I know this is difficult for everybody, but it's certainly not more difficult than the people who feel like they're more at risk of being brutalized than anyone else. So I think this is a moment for us to move forward, and I appreciate everyone's willingness to try to get to some resolve, but we have a lot of work to do. And again, I just want to reiterate the fact that we have disparate outcomes, and data is real, and it's there. But trying to approach race issues in any sector, whether it's education, whether it's criminal justice, through race neutral policies, I think we're just spinning our wheels, because the facts remain. We didn't get to this point through race neutral policies. We didn't get to this point with race neutral policies. When I talked about the situation in Tulsa that happened 99 years ago, it wasn't that long ago. I want us to remember that. The Civil Rights Act wasn't that long ago. And we are still recovering from policies that were intentionally based towards one race and not the other. So yes, we want to move forward, but we can't move forward without looking at the history, and we can't move forward without looking at the facts. So just wanted to state that, and I look forward to working with every member of this committee and every member of this body on trying to address these very real, pervasive issues. So thank you, Representative James. And I don't know if a motion has been made to move favorably, but at the appropriate time, I would like to be the one to offer up that motion.
Thank you. We'll hold that motion. Representative Newell.
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you very much, Chairman James, for bringing this. Listening to my colleagues, I've appreciated this debate. When I read your instrument, I wasn't offended, because this is something that myself, yourself, our families have faced for far too long. But I get the uneasiness of my colleagues from reading this. We each have different reasons for wanting to remove Mr. Floyd's name from the instrument. Mine is solely so that we can get this passed, so that we can start having further discussion and studying it, so that we don't have to have this conversation again. I have been offended since I was 5 years old, and I was told that I was dirty because my skin was brown. You've been offended. Chairman Jenkins, Co-Chair Duplessis has been offended since little boys because of the very system that was created to hold our families down. Rep Moore a couple of weeks ago just brought a bill to remove vagrancy from the books. Vagrancy was a systematic way of keeping black men down. Vagrancy is a crime of being homeless and not having regular work. That definitely was systematically put in place to affect one group of people. The whole criminal justice system was not created until the African American man was freed. There was no criminal justice system. There weren't any prisons. There weren't any officers. There were overseers, but then they became officers. And that was to wrangle up and to continue to get that labor from those men who had been freed. And until we matter, I'm saying it, until Black Lives Matter, all lives can't matter, because black men and women should be encompassed in the all. And this is a heavy conversation. A lot of people are getting really disturbed, sensitive about this matter. But it is a conversation that is long overdue. I'm sorry George Floyd lost his life. But I'm glad that it happened at a time that it did. We had this discussion yesterday that we don't have anything else to do. There's no sports on television. There's nowhere to go because most of the places that we would have been are closed. So we had to see these videos. We had to see that 8 minutes in the streets. It was in our faces. We could not turn away. So then we have more of my white counterparts seeing this and bringing up the conversation and wanting to have the conversation. I've had people that I work with calling me, what can I do to help? This hurts me. And I just tell them, just work with the system. Help us change the system until the group that is behind the problem, not trying to put real blame, but until that group sees and notices that there's a problem. Our children in the street protesting means absolutely nothing because they aren't part of the problem. They're just who the problem is being targeted to, or who's being targeted. So thank you again for having this conversation, for forcing us to have this public conversation. But we need to bring it from a conversation to some legislation for change, and starting with studying the whole law enforcement, all law enforcement, to find out what it is that they're doing, what tactics they're using that can be changed. We do need to have more sensitivity training. If it's to race, if it's to sex, if it's to notice health issues, if a person is having a seizure and not acting out, if a person is mentally challenged and not resisting arrest, they just don't understand what you're talking about. We need to have more discussions based on all those factors, but it needs to start right what this instrument is talking about, and we need to look at race and sex disparities within the law enforcement system. And we don't do seconds to motions, but I would like to second Representative Duplessis's motion to move this instrument favorably so we can continue working on fixing the problem.
Thank you, Representative Noel. Representative Ivy.
All right. Brief. I'll be brief. One of the 7 habits of highly effective people is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. As a white male, okay, certainly not privileged. I've come up from a background, lower middle income, and as many of us have come up. But I can't put myself in the shoes of Representative Ted James and the issues that he's had to deal with, whether it be from law enforcement or other economic issues and challenges. I can't. I can try to be understanding though and listen to the stories. There was a social media post where the conversations that aren't had, I lose the benefit of learning, of understanding what other people have to deal with, right? I know Representative James and my other colleagues are not suggesting that it's a large majority, but there are still issues that we just choose not to discuss. We choose not to put the race label on it in the conversation when we need to, right? We need to listen and understand. I need to do a lot of listening. I need to understand what the problem is. As a problem solver, I believe I can help participate in solving the problem, and we can do it respectfully. And so I do appreciate you bringing the issue up. For me personally, here's the problem, particularly in public service, whether it be teaching, law enforcement, or other, or even in what we do here. When you become jaded, when you become desensitized, when you become disgruntled, and you lose the passion to serve that you had on the first day you show up, it's time to go. Right? And unfortunately, in the sense that whether it be teaching or law enforcement, it's a career decision, right? And unfortunately, when you can't treat the person you pull over with the same amount of respect that you would on your first day, again, using all those precautions, we understand the absolute dangerous nature of law enforcement, using all precautions, but starting out with that mindset to be respectful and to serve the people, it's time to go. And so I think those are the conversations that we need to have, and that's all.
Thank you, Representative Ivey. I'm going to go ahead and read the cards in. Telly Medina with SPLC Action Fund in support does not wish to speak. Edgar Cage with Together Louisiana is present and would like to speak. Mr. Cage, come on up.
Good morning, committee, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I come forward to you with a heavy heart because we need to do something. We need to start to do something, and I think this is a first good step. I would like to see it go or include it in the study, have the outcomes, have the policies, have the tactics and the statistics broken down by race and by gender, where we know who has been affected, by what. I'm also part of Together Baton Rouge, is part of Together Louisiana. In the Alton Sterling incident, we called for calm, we called for peace, and we called for reform. And we were able to work with our local police department on some reform like de-escalation and all, which is good, and use of force, which is good. But in our continuing interaction with the Baton Rouge Police Department, just wanted to say a statement that was given to a group of us. We asked why an officer can't tell you why they're stopping you. And he said, well, it's the officer's discretion. But then the person said, well, a good officer would tell you. And that caused me to wonder, why isn't it policy? So I think once you do the study on what's happening in various departments and the outcomes, then encourage, and a follow-up would be, why isn't the policy different or changed to reflect the issue that the study found? I just don't want the study just to be there and go on the shelf somewhere and nothing happens. And I think this should be looked at periodically because things change. And I just want to make another comment. I wouldn't mind, I think Representative Horton said, I wouldn't mind wearing a uniform, blue uniform for a week. I challenge her to be a black woman for a week and see the difference also. We come from different perspectives. We understand that. That's what makes this world great and good. We are diverse. But we all have rights, and we all should be afforded those rights equally. But I think this resolution is a good start, but I don't think it should be a one-time thing. I think it should be ongoing, and part of that would be how much does the public know if you have a complaint against an officer? That should be information too, because the guy in Minnesota had like 14, I think, complaints before. He probably shouldn't even been on the force. But if you don't know the public, you don't know, then you don't know how to react or how to deal with it. So I ask your support for this resolution moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion to report as amended by Representative Duplessis, House Resolution 13. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, House Resolution 13 will be reported as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members. This is, tough conversations. This today is one of the proudest moments I've had here. Like, these are the kind of conversations we have to have and address when he's not feeling comfortable and he's not feeling comfortable coming to the middle. We got to do what we did today more often. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chairman James.